Hello there, good people, and welcome to It's a Shaw Thing. I'm your host, Rob Shaw. We're talking some fantasy football today. They call the NFL a copycat league. Last year, everyone wanted that split backfield. It appears this time around, everyone wants to be Tom Brady. They are throwing the ball like crazy, and check out the fantasy numbers from some of these quarterbacks. Over 470 passing yards by Kurt Warner, 6 touchdowns by Brett Favre, J.T. O'Sullivan, Kyle Orton, names you never would have imagined carrying fantasy significance, but lo and behold, they have. Oh my, now time to sort through this fantasy significance of the weekend. I'm going to talk about 3 players moving on up and 3 players moving down. We're going to start at the quarterback position. Jason Campbell off to a very nice start. This is a guy who threw 2 touchdowns, 231 yards against an in-division foe, got the big win, and so far on the season, his fantasy managers have been winners despite that ugly performance to start off the season against the New York Giants. He has yet to throw an interception. 6 touchdowns, no interceptions. The Redskins have a lead receiver. His name is Santana Moss. He seems to come and go year in, year out, but this year he seems to be there, and they've been very steady so far. He's got a nice safety valve with Chris Cooley at tight end. They're throwing the ball around. Antoine Randall. They've got some nice young receivers that they look to break in. I'll tell you, this guy's really improving. Look at his numbers last year. They weren't all that bad, and they actually weren't all that great either, but at the same time, this is a guy who is improving in the NFL. I say buy low right now if you can. If you can't even get him, this is one of those guys who, in my opinion, is only going to get better as the season progresses. And I'll tell you, considering he hasn't thrown an interception, that means it's going to be pretty darn good. All right, now let's talk about a quarterback who might have peaked a little bit early, Aaron Rodgers. All right, I know he got off to a great start, but guess what? The secret is out. The scouting reports are now being shoveled out across the teams in the NFL. And that being said, this past weekend, a guy who came in with 4 touchdowns, no interceptions, threw 3 interceptions in this one, despite getting 2 touchdowns as well. Him and Greg Jennings have a nice rapport, but I'll tell you what, the pressure is starting to mount on this guy. He felt some contact, and he didn't look all that great. In fact, he threw for under 200 yards. This is a guy who's going to feel some pressure. Only his first full season in the NFL as far as being a starting quarterback. Heck, he hadn't started a game until this season. So that being said, beware. I know he got off to a nice start. He might have had some nice rewards quickly, but it might be time to sell high. It's going to be a different game from here on out for Aaron Rodgers. All right, my friends, now let's talk about the running backs, and let's stick with Green Bay, where we have some more bad news. How about the numbers from Ryan Grant? They were abysmal this past weekend. 15 carries, 20 rushing yards in the entire game. He also fumbled the ball. All right, look at the numbers on the entire season. He is averaging fewer than 50 yards per game. This is a guy who was sensational in the second half of last season, but be careful. Brandon Jackson is just ready to get the ball in his hands, and if he does, he could do some damage. This could be a split backfield, or even worse, if Grant continues to struggle. I know he had some injuries in the beginning of the year. Wasn't listed on the injury report, though, so watch out. Brandon Jackson might evolve as a starting running back of this team. I don't know how big a leash they're going to give this guy, but Grant clearly has struggled so far. If you have him, at the very least, put him on the bench for now. As far as a guy who might have been on your bench a couple of weeks ago, but definitely have him out starting, Larry Johnson. This is a guy who's been very high on from the beginning of the season. I know last year was ugly. He got injured, but look at the 2 years before that, over 1,700 rushing yards. This is a Herm Edwards offense. They like to push the ball plenty. Look at what Curtis Martin, he was used and abused for many years under Herm Edwards of the New York Jets, and back then numbers were great in fantasy, and that's what matters most. The only question is, are the Chiefs going to be able to keep it close that they can continue to utilize the run? Well, this past weekend they played against one of the best teams in the NFL thus far in Denver, and they still did very, very well. 28 carries, 198 yards, 2 touchdowns, the best rushing performance of the season. Well, maybe Michael Turner did better in week 1, but Larry Johnson was fantastic. The best of the week, to say the least. Larry Johnson, 2 straight weeks now with stellar performances. I think it's legit. This is a guy you definitely want to have on your roster. All right, moving on, let's talk about the wide receivers now. And I know some people, when they first saw the numbers from Muhsin Muhammad in the beginning of the year, figured, all right, he's only filling in for Steve Smith. We saw it coming. He'll do good the first couple of weeks, but then he'll go down from there. And sure enough, 50-plus yards his first 2 games of the year. Wasn't all that great in week 3, but check out the numbers this past weekend. 8 receptions, 147 yards with a touchdown. I don't know why, but he has a nice rapport in Carolina. Jake Delhomme. This is a guy who 4 years ago had over 1,400 receiving yards, had 16 touchdowns. He cashed in, went around to Chicago, struggled a bit there, but now he's got a guy who could clearly get the ball. Delhomme's looked great so far. He's got Steve Smith to attract all sorts of attention from the defense. Muhsin Muhammad might be able to put up some pretty solid numbers this season. I'm thinking over 1,000 yards. This is a guy who might even still be available on your waiver wire. Go ahead, pick him up. He could give you some pretty solid numbers for the season. As far as a wide receiver, they might want to be careful with. Anquan Bolden having a sensational season, and it's a little concerning. This is a guy who's just been trying to get that contract. He was holding out for a little while. The Cardinals still have not given him the guaranteed money, and then you see the type of hit that he took this past weekend against the New York Jets, gets carted off the field in the fourth quarter. It's a scary sport, my friends, and I'm not sure he's going to be able to bounce back so quickly. Remember, the Cardinals don't have a bye for another couple of weeks, not until the end of October. So that being said, you might have him on the bench for the next couple of weeks, and if that's the case, there's a guy by the name of Steve Preston who really broke out this game, actually tied Larry Fitzgerald with the most yards in it. So that being said, you might want to get your hands on Preston, but at the same time, Bolden, might not be able to rely on him. We'll wait for the reports to come out, but it looked like a very scary injury, and if he's out for the next couple of weeks, you will have to look for some other options. Well, my friends, that's your fantasy football report, just trying to dig through these crazy numbers. It is very much a passing league this season, which means more fun for fantasy managers. Well, that's all for now. I'll see you tomorrow right here at opensports.com.
So you think you can tackle a pro? There's only one way to find out. Click on fantasy at opensports.com.